It is Monday, October 21st, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Grace Blakeley, English, economics, and politics commentator, staff writer at the Tribune, author of Vulture Capitalism, Corporate Crimes, Backdoor Bailouts.
Sam, I'm sorry. We had an audio error. Can we take it from the top?
Sure.
What happened? Sorry about that. There was a glitch here. I'm just going to cut back and cut right back to you.
Okay.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
Once again, it is Monday, October 21st, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Grace Blakeley, economics and politics commentator, staff writer at the Tribune, author of Vulture Capitalism, Corporate Crimes, Backdoor Bailouts, and the Death of Freedom. Also on the program today, 14 days until the election, and the presidential candidates begin to make their final arguments. Kamala Harris focuses on abortion rights and Trump's gaping leadership and cognitive failures. Meanwhile, Donald Trump emphasizes just how big golfer Arnold Palmer's penis was. Meanwhile, Israel continues its butcherous assault on Palestinian civilians. Harris calls these casualties unconscionable, but doesn't call for weapons curtailment. Meanwhile, somehow the Israeli plans to strike Iran have leaked. Under the weight of inexplicable and continued U.S. sanctions, Cuba's power grid fails as it's hit by a hurricane. Elon Musk's reported get out the vote failures are only rivaled by the illegality of his pay-to-be-registered raffle scheme. Boeing tenders a new offer to striking workers. The National Association of Letter Carriers strikes a tentative deal with the post office, but the letter carriers themselves don't seem impressed, and as far as I can tell, with good reason. U.S. National Highway Transportation Safety Administration launches an investigation into Tesla's self-driving tech. And lastly, the Fed's report explains why the economy sucks for many. And the reason? It's rich people. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Emma, feeling a little under the weather these days. She's been on a Twitter binge, as many people. I saw Daniel Nickanian wrote something to the effect of, if I just scroll one more time through my Twitter feed, I will figure out who will win the election. And that I have to say that I am also have fallen into that wormhole.
Just gather more information and then you'll get it.
Exactly. It's just, it's relentless. Also, I spent, at 4 a.m. now, I'm like doing deep dives into the Warsaw Ghetto. It's an interesting story. When I work through that history a little bit more, but some of the survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto ended up founding a kibbutz that is in the south of Israel, right north of Gaza. They repelled an attack by about 30 or 40 Hamas fighters. But it is fascinating to track the history of this kibbutz and this village. If you dig really deep, you can find how in 1945 this village was depopulated. And that's the only mention of it. There's a lot of other mentions. There's mentions of how they fought back the Egyptians in the 1948 war in the wake of Israel's independence. But it's really hard to find any information about that depopulation, which, of course, sent the people in this village, this Palestinian village that had been there for at least, as far as I could tell, 400 or 500 years, in full existence, paying taxes. It was not a nation, but they were paying taxes. They had entities. And then they are sent to Gaza, which in many respects is analogous to the Warsaw Ghetto. But maybe I'll get more specific in that stuff in the future. This was just off the I didn't even mean to talk about this today. But before we do, obviously, we're 14 days away from the election. And the polling, I don't think, is going to tell you anything different today than it did 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, or frankly, 4 or 5 or 6 weeks ago. The only stories I think that are out over the weekend that are going to impact the election have more to do with trying to divine what the get out the vote plans and their ability to be executed are on the ground. We have some stories about that. They all seem to revolve around Elon Musk because
giving him attention.
Well, he is spending, what appears to be well over $100 million in different sort of like buckets, ranging from a group that is sending out 2 different micro-targeted ads to voters in Michigan, one to Jews, one to Muslims. And both ads basically say, imply that to the Jews, oh, she loves the Muslims. To the Muslims, she loves the Jews, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get into that. Also into the illegality of his new scheme to give $1 million a day away to a registered voter. Now, registration ends today, so I'm not clear why he decided to do that for the next 35 days, but he wants people on this petition. It is a way to collect your data. What they will do with that data is ostensibly get you to get out the vote. Cannot encourage people enough to sign up for this. I would reject the money if you get offered it because it may be illegal, frankly. Certainly the raffle is. Where it's unclear about the initial $100 you get in Pennsylvania, $47 you get in other places. But I cannot encourage you folks enough. Get out there, get that money. If you don't get the money, also know that they're going to be expending resources and bringing you to the polls. And I'm going to imagine that most of the people listening to the sound of my voice are not planning to vote for Trump. And so you can drain Elon Musk both of money and efficacy. We're going to get to that later, but let's get to what we're starting to see is the shaping up of closing arguments. Tomorrow on the program, Em and I will talk about where you can see the final closing set of ads and where the appeal, what issue set they're appealing to. There are some where the ads are ramping up and there are some where they're ramping down. The big one for Harris seems to be focused on Donald Trump, the person, in the final days. Again, probably trying to sort of encourage wayward Republicans who may still be on the fence. People can argue as to the effectiveness of that strategy. I continually go back and forth. In addition to just not liking it for other reasons, I'm not sure if it's effective or not, but I hope it is. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is in.
Speaking of shaping up.
Exactly. He's been campaigning around. He will play some footage of him pretending to work at a McDonald's. But he was in Latrobe, Pennsylvania on Saturday. And for the first 12 minutes of his campaign rally, he told stories about how Arnold Palmer, when he was aging, couldn't drive a golf ball as far as he could. And, but Arnold Palmer said, back in the day, I would have been much better than you. It's funny. I wonder if Trump feels awkward telling this story now about somebody who had lost a couple of steps. Yeah, I wonder if he has a moment of clarity, and maybe that's what it is, because then he goes sort of off the rails. Some people argue that early signs of dementia are an inability to inhibit your impulses and to say things in certain contexts that might not be appropriate or effective to what you're trying to communicate. But here is Donald Trump, when, incidentally, one of the biggest issues, of course, is about women's bodily autonomy. Here is Donald Trump, I guess, trying to sort of like celebrate all bodies.
Arnold Palmer was all man. And I say that in all due respect to women, and I love women. But this is a guy that was all man. This man was strong and tough. And
Pause it for 1 second. I just want to, I know this goes without saying, but if you are saying all due respect to women, this guy was all man. The implication is, the implication is that men are better, right? Like, I mean, why would you feel in your brain you need to say, I don't want to offend any women, but he was all men? Well, what are you really saying there? What you're saying is that he was a quality person. With all due respect to women, he was the tippity top of the people we know who are supposed to be in charge.
And why?
And well, how do you know he was all man? Well, did you take showers at the club?
Due respect to women, and I love women, but this is a guy that was all man. This man was strong and tough, and I refuse to say it, but when he took showers with the other pros, they came out of there, they said, oh my God, that's unbelievable. I had to say it. We have women that are highly sophisticated here, but they used to look at Arnold as a bad, but he was really something special. Arnold was something special. So I just want to tell you, you're very lucky, the people that live in Latrobe, and it's an honor for me to be here because of him.
That's right. Some of you may have even had the opportunity to see his penis. And if that's the case, that's great. I don't know. Have you ever seen the huge ball of string? Where is that?
What's Latrobe produced since that thing, you know?
It's hard to talk about, but it was huge. I don't know what to tell you, folks. I suppose maybe that's effective with some people. I don't know. But there you go. all man. And what's the proof? Big penis. In a moment, we're going to be talking what the commentary is for that. He's back to it. And this may be, I don't know, this may be, I think, look, they have been running a campaign that is geared towards low propensity voters who are male. Low propensity male voters. And they think this is going to work to bring them out. It might. I don't know. I really have no sense if I was, 18 to 34, if the prospect of Donald Trump having firsthand knowledge of the size of a golfer's penis, a golfer, incidentally, who I probably barely have ever heard of. So just basically some random dude's penis. Maybe that would inspire me to vote if I didn't vote in 2020, 2022. It's really, really difficult to understand. Jack from Queens says, what you liberal Brooklyn elites don't realize is that nothing motivates suburban women more to vote like talking about the penises of professional athletes. I mean, I may be, touche. I don't know what else to say. In a moment, we're going to be talking to Grace Blakeley, economics and politics commentator, I should say, staff writer at the Tribune, author of Vulture Capitalism, Corporate Crimes, Backdoor Bailouts, and the Death of Freedom. But first, let me tell you, it's amazing that I get any sleep these days because, like I say, I'm I can't get off Twitter. I can't get off of just reading news stories. The next 14 days are basically going to be the same. The only thing that gets me to sleep, the only thing that keeps me to sleep is because of my Cozy Earth bamboo sheets. They are made with viscose. And I want to thank Cozy Earth for sponsoring this episode. You can unlock an exclusive discount of up to 40% using the code Majority Report at cozyearth.com/Majority Report. I have now Cozy Earth sheets, Cozy Earth towels. I have a pair of Cozy Earth joggers, which are fantastic, and an amazing hoodie, which is both lightweight when you carry it. It feels warm when you wear it. It also is cooling when it's hot out. I've never worn anything quite like this. And it's because of this viscose. Viscose is produced from bamboo. And right now you can feel the difference with Cozy Earth's best-selling bamboo sheet set. Again, made from 100% premium viscose, which is from bamboo. Cozy Earth's breathable sheets are uniquely soft, and they only get softer with every wash. All Cozy Earth bedding products come with a 100-night sleep trial. If you're not completely in love, return it for a full refund. Cozy Earth's goal is to help you create a sanctuary within your home, a refuge from the outside world's demands. Now, if you're like me and you're constantly scrolling through the internet, you can't do that. But nevertheless, still feels good. Your 9 to 5, or your 5 to 9, I should say, should consist of relaxation, rejuvenation, unwinding, and embracing a sense of calm. With Cozy Earth, you can transform your space into an elevated haven where serenity and renewal intertwine effortlessly. Cozy Earth sheets are so breathable, you're going to sleep several degrees cooler. That's the thing that saves me. They're made with this durable weave fabric that won't pill. It's guaranteed for 10 years. And the ultimate ingredient for a luxurious sleep is softness. Cozy Earth use of only the best fabrics and textiles enhances that. Cozy Earth prides itself on responsible production of its products. You know, bamboo grows like a weed because it's like a weed. Cozy Earth bedding products have a 10-year warranty. Your peace of mind matters. Make a smart choice this election season. Embrace the comfort of Cozy Earth and feel the difference. Go to cozyearth.com/majority report, one word. Use the code majority report, one word, for an exclusive discount of up to 40% off. That's cozyearth.com/majority report. If you get a post-purchase survey, say that you heard about Cozy Earth from the Majority Report podcast. Let them know. We'll put the link in the podcast and YouTube description and at majority.fm as always. Meanwhile, are you feeling sluggish, low energy, and unfocused? Well, your body might be telling you it needs a deep clean. Prolon by L Nutra is a scientifically backed fasting mimicking diet designed to clean out the cobwebs on a cellular level. Just 5 days can make a meaningful difference in your overall health. Introducing Prolon, it's a revolutionary plant-based nutrition program that nourishes the body while making cells believe they're fasting. It was researched and developed for decades at the University of Southern California Longevity Institute. Backed by leading U.S. medical centers, Prolon helps promote healthy blood sugar. It helps support cardiovascular health and reduce abdominal fat. Prolon is not a diet, it's science. Science based on Nobel Prize-winning discoveries in medicine. And all this starts with Prolon's 5-day program, snacks, soups, beverages, all designed to keep your body in a fasting state. It's unlike anything you've ever experienced. I did this in February. My sister just finished it up last week, was it? You think it's going to be impossible to do, but it's not. I was able to do the show and I felt great. And what it does, you can read about this on their site, but what it does is as you go through the different phases of fasting, essentially with food, your body goes through these different phases. In the last one, you get this type of cellular regeneration. And I mean, for me, the big thing I wanted to check out was sort of like longevity. They say it's good if you do this on a regular intermittent basis, twice a year, 3 times a year. Anyways, you should check this out if you have any interest in this type of program. It's amazing how within reach this is. Right now, Prolon's offering the Majority Report with Sam Seder listeners 15% off their 5-day nutrition program. Go to prolonlife.com/majority. That's PROLONLIFE.com. prolonlife.com/majority for this special offer. We will put a link in the podcast and YouTube description. We will be back in just a minute. Are we going to, is our guest calling in?
She'll be in a little bit. Yep. So just a second. She should be logged in.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll take a quick break. When we come back, when we come back, we will be talking to her. Let me just take a couple IMs here. Swifties for Emma. I'm in Pittsburgh. There are 3 people from my home that sign up for paid canvasser jobs, sign the petition, etc. I don't know if it's wives, but I have been on Republican lists since 2018 and have polled as a deep conservative. Nice. Young Socialist. Sam, what do you think about Alan Lichtman's 13 keys? He may be right. Well, we'll see. I don't really think about it too much, to be honest with you, but I guess we'll have a better sense after the election if he was right. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Grace Blakeley, staff writer at the Tribune, author of Vulture Capitalism, Corporate Crimes, Backdoor Bailouts, and the Death of Freedom. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out today. Joining us now, Grace Blakeley, economics, politics commentator, also staff writer at the Tribune and author of Vulture Capitalism, Corporate Crimes, Backdoor Bailouts, and the Death of Freedom. Grace, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So let's start with sort of the central myth that you discuss in your book, which is that people often get wrong that the question of capitalism or not is one of the state versus the market. And this also dovetails with neoliberalism, but we'll get there. But let's start on this sort of like top line level.
Yeah, so most people, when you ask them, consider capitalism to be this kind of free market system. And historically, we've had this kind of opposition between an idea of a centrally planned socialist society on the one hand and a free market democratic capitalist society on the other hand. And that was kind of epitomized during the Cold War with the US and the USSR. And that narrative has really embedded this idea that capitalist societies are these kind of nice democratic free market systems where the production of resources is decentralized, the market gets to decide everything, and any kind of big corporations are held to account within kind of democratic institutions. The issue is that model does not apply to actually existing capitalist societies, particularly the biggest and most powerful capitalist societies like the US, like the UK, and other kind of big imperialist economies. And the reason for that is that you neither have free markets nor real democracy. So when you look at markets, you see an immense amount of corporate concentration. So a lot of power at the very top of the economy in the hands of those, big monopolistic corporations. What does that mean? It means that the market isn't functioning the way that it should. The whole idea behind capitalism is that competition acts as a kind of disciplinary force within the market to make sure that resources are produced most efficiently. But when you have market concentration and monopoly power, that doesn't work. So you have that, you don't really have that sense of accountability and discipline within the market. Instead, big corporations are basically able to do whatever they want. Then we look at democracy. This is supposed to be, the thing that we can rely on so that ordinary people can be represented within our political institutions. And actually, rather than kind of real democracy, what we see is corporate capture of our political institutions. So the centralization of power in a small number of hands at the very top of our politics, and equally that divide between economics and politics, so between the state and the market that we're told exists in capitalist societies, doesn't obtain either, because governments will step in to bail out corporations whenever they're in trouble. And the executives in those corporations and financiers and whatever will spend a lot of time lobbying politicians to try and get their favored policies implemented. So you don't have this separation between the market and the state. You don't have free market democracy. Instead, in a capitalist economy, you have such a significant concentration of power that you effectively end up having this kind of capitalist oligarchy, effectively. And that oligarchy has so much power that it's able to plan in the same way or in a similar way to those kind of centralized states that we think of as the opposite to capitalism. And really what that means, and I'll give some examples in a minute, is that the mechanisms that are supposed to exist for ordinary people to hold elites to account no longer work.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack in that one, but let's start with, and I want to just put a pin in the question as to what being problematic about our system being the concentration where we are relative to like antitrust policy, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to start more at the notion of like a free market. When you say the market should, what the should you're talking about is the theory that has been promulgated to us as if it exists in a natural state. And when you talk about the false separation between politics and economy, what you're really saying is that the economy is a function of choices that we as a society make that are being influenced by let's break down that question of where we are in the trajectory of capitalism that has led to this monopolization, this quality. Like, how inevitable was it? And then I want to go back to the neoliberals and this vision of supposed free market, which that was never their plan.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, these questions around freedom and like how the market should look are important, because this is part of the kind of lie that we were sold, particularly during the 1980s. The idea was that, neoliberal governments, so right-wing governments like those of Thatcher in the UK, Reagan in the US, Pinochet in Chile, they would come to power and they would create these lovely free markets that would distribute resources efficiently, that would promote human freedom, and that would promote competition, and that would make everyone better off. And this was the narrative. And, those of us on the left have always pushed back against that narrative and said, there are problems with organizing society just according to the logic of the market. But what I've kind of talked about in this book is how we're not even criticizing the reality. We're criticizing the ideas that were presented to us. And actually, the neoliberals never really wanted to create a true free market system. They never really wanted to impose competition on everyone. They wanted to impose really, really ruthless competition on the vast majority of us, force us all to compete with each other instead of cooperating as we had been through the labor movement, through kind of protest movements. But those at the top, the powerful, they were insulated from competition. They didn't have to kind of put up with this competitive pressure. Instead, they were much better able to cooperate with each other to get what they wanted. And the example that I want to use to kind of illustrate this point, and your listeners might be familiar with this, is the example of Boeing. Now, a lot of you will have seen Boeing in the news recently with things like a door blowing out of the plane mid-flight. Its workers are on strike. But if you look back a few years to 2019 and 2018, 2 Boeing 737 MAX planes crashed out of the sky, killing nearly 350 people. And in the investigations that followed, it was basically revealed that Boeing executives had known that they had manufactured an unsafe plane, that there were parts in this plane that didn't work properly, that senior people within the company knew about it. But not only that, the regulator knew about it. So the FAA was regulating Boeing through a philosophy of self-regulation, which is the same philosophy that underpinned how the banks were being regulated before 2008. And the idea was that they would never manufacture an unsafe plane because they would be hurt by their competition. Obviously, that didn't happen because they don't really exist in a truly competitive market. There's Boeing and there's Airbus, and they kind of barely compete with each other over price. Instead, they basically work to maximize their profits. And this is what we saw within Boeing, by crushing workers, by cutting costs with the effect of making unsafe planes, and by developing really close relationships with governments. And the relationship between Boeing and the American state is so deep and so profound and goes back such a long time. I talk about it in my book. It would take kind of too long to actually talk about all the links that exist between those two institutions here. But suffice to say that when those 2 plane crashes happened, Boeing was the biggest recipient of corporate welfare in the US. So it was getting tons of money in tax breaks, subsidies, loads of support from the government. It had tons of government contracts. And then even after Boeing was found to have committed a criminal conspiracy to defraud the United States, so it had been held to account in the courts a little bit. Even after that, it still got a big backdoor bailout during the pandemic. So this, I think, exposes this idea that those at the top are really working together through these institutions that allow them to cooperate to basically, get away with anything and pursue profits at any costs. But the mechanisms that should exist to hold them to account aren't working effectively anymore.
I think I want to ask you if you think there is actually such a thing as a free market, and just reiterate. And I think hopefully this audience, we've talked about it probably maybe too much, but this idea of neoliberalism being about free markets was a myth from the beginning. And in fact, if you go back to the Mont Pelerin Society, where all these guys, Hayek and et al., gathered and developed neoliberalism, it was explicitly for, we're going to, to do exactly that model of a Boeing. We're going to We want to make sure that corporations have the ability to sort of like set the rules within a context of a certain industry. It was fundamentally anti-democratic, also against the sovereignty of nations in many respects. And it just was floating around there for 30 or 40 years in the wake of World War II, and finally landed. But talk about the idea as to whether we actually could have a free market, because I'm skeptical. Markets don't exist in nature. There's no such thing. The government sets up a market, either consciously or unconsciously. I would argue, well, a mix of both, I think, depending on the ideology of the people involved. But just even the concept of a free market is a lie that is, I think, used to obscure the choices that we as a society, through our government, end up making.
Yeah. So there's a lot to say there. Firstly, this idea of whether a free market is possible in theory. So, the kinds of markets we have now today, you couldn't create them. They wouldn't emerge naturally because, as you say, there are so many institutions, laws, resources that are required to underpin all of the market interactions that we have every day. A business needs roads, which are built by the state. It needs a legal system, which is enforced by the state. It needs to know what's going to happen when it goes bankrupt. It needs to know, how its investments are going to be managed. It needs a currency to be able to trade in. All of these things are created by states, basically. Now, the neoliberals weren't that naive about the existence of markets. They knew that they wouldn't emerge naturally and that the kinds of markets they wanted did have to be created. So what they said, and this is actually, what Hayek himself said, that the neoliberal revolution needed to be underpinned by what he called a double truth, effectively a lie. And what he meant was that to the masses, to ordinary people, the neoliberal revolution would be presented as this kind of nice free market return to natural human behavior, i.e., it's this myth that human beings are all naturally competitive, that money emerged because one person was making wool and another person was making shoes, and so they needed a unit of currency to trade with each other, and it was all very nice and natural, and that's kind of what they wanted to create because the government has gotten in the way and prevented us human beings from kind of doing the thing that we ordinarily do, which is trade with each other. That was the narrative that was presented. But what was really happening was that the neoliberals had this very explicit vision to effectively protect corporate power. And they had lots of different academic justifications for that. But the main one was basically that they thought entrepreneurs and the people who own capital know how to use that capital best. They basically think that workers are kind of drones, that they're not very intelligent, that there's a natural hierarchy in society, and that those at the top who own the resources should basically get to tell everyone else what to do. So, that was one of many justifications that they have for this idea that corporate power actually needs to be protected. And for some of the neoliberals, monopoly was never really a problem. They would talk about free markets, but they would say, actually, it's fine to have monopolies in free markets. And the rest of the project as well was really aimed at making sure that democracy didn't get in the way of free markets. So they had this project to what they called encase economic norms, particularly at the level of the global economy. So if any state kind of stepped forward and threatened things like privatization, the free movement of capital, low tax rates, etc., that they could be effectively punished in one way or another. That there were institutions that existed globally, underpinned by American imperial power, that would protect everywhere the rights of capital. So you can see this.
We can
really
see that embedded in the attempt for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and this that came out of this country. And NAFTA has some of those tools, but like the investor relations dispute mechanism supersedes existing laws in various countries, and basically says, if we anticipated going into your market and selling, this product that your EPA comes out and says we're banning it, you got to pay us for what we anticipated going in there. It attempts to essentially blackmail countries, municipalities, states from passing regulations that ostensibly reflect the will of the people, that could inhibit their profits.
I assume your listeners are familiar with the Chevron ISDS case in Ecuador and the case of Steven Dozinger.
Yes, I mean,
about that before?
it's been a couple of years, but yes, this is the similar dynamic here. And, we, you know, a lot of times we see it in terms of logging with Canada or vice versa. It is, we don't talk about it too much because the TPP went away, but these dynamics continue to exist. So let's just talk about the state spending, because as von Hayek is and his Mont Pelerin crew are beginning to seed this idea of neoliberalism, which in some respects also you can see in this country, we call it libertarianism on some level. We have Keynes, who is offering a different vision of the state, but one which at one point, as things get consolidated, starts to exacerbate that inequality problem.
Yeah. So a lot of the kind of debates within economics, and I suppose this was part of why I wrote the book, because I wanted to intervene within these debates. They're pitched as debates between people who want a small state and free markets and people who want a bigger state and more regulated markets. And this was basically the debate between Hayek, the neoliberal, and Keynes, the social democrat, right? And this was the debate that dominated politics during the 20th century. What kind of changed the dynamics was the fact that these different ideological views were kind of connected to class movements. So organized workers picked up Keynes's views and basically said, we're organizing to demand greater levels of state protection for workers, greater regulation of businesses, the management of the business cycle. So they would say it was the role of the state to kind of smooth the business cycle and make sure that periods of unemployment were kind of reduced and take a more active role in the economy. That's the Keynesian view. Whereas the neoliberal view, which was all about, free markets in inverted commas, actually about the state acting in the interests of big business and in the interest of finance, that was obviously ultimately picked up by capital. Lobbying groups and big financial institutions, all of these people who were involved in, as you say, the Mont Pelerin Society, and continue to push governments for these changes to policy. Now, I think what's really interesting about this battle is it defines politics throughout the kind of post-war period. And ultimately, the neoliberals win. In the 1980s, they elect governments like those of Thatcher and Reagan, and the interests of those at the top of the capitalists basically come to dominate. But what also happens when the neoliberals come to power is that they use that state power to crush and fragment the working class power that had previously led us to have these much more kind of interventionist governments that had greater levels of spending on public services, that invested more in the economy. And they did this in a number of different ways. Firstly, obviously, they crushed the unions. So in the UK, for example, you had the miners' strike, which was crushed brutally by Margaret Thatcher, miners literally beaten up everywhere, anti-union legislation, privatization of state-owned industries where the labor movement was strong. And then, and this is the interesting thing, you also had this kind of revolution in the way that people see themselves and the way that they see society. Thatcher said, the method is economics, the object is to change the soul. She wanted to undermine these kind of cooperative instincts that people had and that had underpinned everything that workers had won, from the New Deal in the US to the NHS in the UK to workers' rights to the weekend to whatever. That all came from workers coming together and organizing collectively to take on the interests of those at the top. What neoliberalism did was said, you shouldn't cooperate. That's not natural. That's not normal. You should compete with each other, because that's how human beings are built. And we're going to create all these institutions that force you to compete with one another, because you can't join a union. You can't work together to demand a higher wage from your boss. So what are you going to do? You're going to work harder. You're going to say, right, if I need a pay increase, I have to basically elbow everyone around me out of the way to get that. If I don't get it, then I'm going to blame myself and internalize the idea that I'm useless because I'm not paid as much as anyone else around me. And that creates this really powerful ideological mechanism that legitimizes the whole system, because you stop blaming those at the top for things that have gone wrong. You stop cooperating with people around you to try and hold them to account. And instead you blame yourself and you compete with everyone else.
And talk about how, which I found fascinating, and I've only really seen it in, I don't know if you've seen those Adam Curtis documentaries, but in hypernormalization, like that concept of you're going through the 60s and you're having these emancipatory movements that are both broadly emancipatory. We had the Civil Rights Act in this country. We had, first wave of feminism, and commensurate sort of rights that were expanded up into, what basically a white guy got in our society, whether it was voting, whether it was like the ability for women to have their own credit card, and that emancipatory movement, which also sort of went down to the individual. You don't conform, you liberate yourself. You can, grow your hair as long as you want. You can wear whatever. That impulse was hijacked and extended into what you're talking about with this competitive nature.
Yeah. That is a big part of it. I think what is really significant when you look back now as to how that culture was embedded, it was with both carrot and stick. So there was the stick of, the ways in which those movements were crushed, beaten, made illegal. Today we're seeing demonstrators all over the world being put in prison for peaceful protests. That's the legacy of that kind of movement against popular power. But there was this really powerful stick element of it too, which was basically, how do we turn people into mini capitalists? How do we convince workers that they're not workers with something in common with other workers? They are investors or they're entrepreneurs, right? And both Reagan and Thatcher did this really successfully through a number of different mechanisms. Firstly, there was this big boom in real estate, and they deregulated the finance sector so that loads of people could buy their own houses. And then all of that money that was being created by the financial sector would get pumped into the housing market, push up house prices. Suddenly you have people with loads and loads of wealth in their homes thinking, wow, I'm a really successful and intelligent investor. You also privatize people's pensions and get them to invest in the stock market. So that again links their sense of prosperity to financial interests and to the interests of capital more generally. They start to see themselves as mini capitalists again. And then you have these, big movements in education as well, where we are encouraged to think of getting an education as investing in our human capital, as much as, a business that wants to invest in its capital takes out a loan to build a new factory. As a human being, you think, I'm not getting education to kind of broaden my horizons or learn something new or get a better job. I'm investing in myself as a little piece of capital. So I'm taking out a loan, buying a degree, and then leveraging that to achieve success later in life. All of these things really encouraged the idea that, you are not a worker. You are this little individual entrepreneur, and it's your job to balance your assets and your liabilities, to take out debt, and to use that to acquire assets, to invest in the stock market, and just generally to kind of identify with the interests of those exploiting you effectively. And it was not only effective because some people did get lots of wealth, and so everyone else looked at those people and thought, well, that could be me. It was much deeper than that. It was, when you see yourself as one little business competing with all these other little businesses, it deeply undermines anyone's sense of solidarity. And it's so ingrained now. If you think about young people, particularly on social media, right? There's this whole
social
idea
media is a complete training ground to develop your personal brand. I mean,
exactly.
However many likes, it could be substituted with, I've made $10,000 or whatever it is. And it's just, yes, it's like Vegas for kids, essentially, on some level. Well, I want to talk about before we get to sort of you provide both examples of the tendency of monopolization under this system. And it's sort of it was for a long time completely shrouded in this country in a redefinition that came out of the Chicago school, Milton Friedman, and it was Robert Bork in this instance, a redefinition of what constituted an unfair monopoly. It narrowed what the how it was measured to just the question of, does it lower prices, even though very often ultimately it did not lower prices. But by narrowing the what constituted the qualifications for a monopoly, we had a 40, 50-year stretch in this country anyways of mergers, acquisitions, consolidation, whatnot. It has changed under the Biden administration. There's a lot of questions as to whether it will continue in the same fashion under the Harris administration. But you walk through and you give several examples of these things: Ford Motor Company, Amazon, the financialization, the banks in the wake of the TARP. Let me ask you this relative to the question of antitrust policy in a broad sense, the idea that we need to democratize things more, both in terms of smaller firms having more opportunity to compete, that you don't have the bar to entry is so high. Also, what it does for democracy, you don't have an Amazon or an Elon Musk or, a Boeing that can dictate the policy of our government. How do you sequence this? Because, it's small bore stuff, but there has been, an interesting argument between people who I think more identify with socialism and social democracy, and those who are more capitalist but believe that the market is encumbered by monopolization and financialization. How do you reconcile those two things? Are those things at odds with each other? Do you see them as a sequencing? What's your perspective on that?
So I don't really believe that it's possible to have a market without concentration and monopoly. And this is an argument that Marx actually made when he talked about the development of capitalism. He said that there was an inherent tendency towards the centralization of capital, so a smaller number of businesses producing more stuff. And there's lots of reasons for that. The most obvious is that, as capitalism develops, technology becomes more sophisticated and more stuff, more resources, more capital, more money is required just to produce the kinds of things we take for granted. Take, for example, the airline industry. You couldn't just set up a competitor for Boeing overnight because the capital, in every sense of the word, that's required to start a business like that is so huge. And that is an inherent tendency that takes place over the course of the development of capitalism.
But you could have a regulatory regime like we used to have in this country, where we had, literally dozens more airlines prior to deregulation, where you could basically impose a set of restrictions that say it's impossible for you to amass this. And we're going to create a situation where the bar to entry is going to be lower, and we're going to cause you to break up. We may see this with Google. Is there from a socialist perspective value in that step, and if so, why?
Great question, and it really comes down to a kind of chicken and egg problem, which is about why does the capitalist state do what it does? Now, the kind of socialist answer to this question is that governments implement progressive policies when they're forced to, because the balance of class power is such that they don't have a choice, right? Now, if you look at, yes, the New Deal and also all of the kind of original antitrust, laws that came before that, this set of policies was developed in a very, very different world than the one we have today. They were developed in a world of, firstly, substantial working class power. Secondly, the kind of geopolitical conflict that required the government to kind of take bigger steps to intervene in the economy, basically. And if you look at progressive economic and social policy in the US in particular, it emerges from this combination of The government wants the economy to be working effectively and to be, relatively just because it's fighting a war, and workers want their fair share. So these external conditions, some internal conditions, come together to give us this set of progressive legislation. Now, if we look at the situation today, it's very different because worker power, whilst it is building, and we are seeing greater levels of unionization and those sorts of things, it's nowhere near at the point that we saw, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. So the government is not beholden to any interests other than basically those of big business and of different sections of capital. So if you look at the Democrats and the Republicans, for example, why do they do what they do? Well, the Republicans are basically completely in the pockets of a certain subset of very, very extractive capitalists. So we're thinking particular of, historically that's been fossil fuels, finance, etc. Now increasingly tech as well. Whereas the Democrats have this broader view as to how to make capitalism work over the long run. And these are basically debates that take place amongst the capitalist class. It's like, do we take everything we can and run right now, or do we try and create a system that allows us to maintain our profits over the long run? And what Biden and others saw was that if you have an economy which becomes so drastically unfair, so intensely concentrated that small businesses can't compete, that workers aren't getting their fair share, and that basically oligarchs are controlling politics and running off with tons of money, that system isn't going to survive very long. So it's a kind of self-interested attempt to make that system function more effectively. It was never going to go particularly far because, again, he still has to answer to the interests of the people who are basically, influencing what he does more than anyone, which is corporate interests. So the socialist argument isn't that we shouldn't have antitrust. It's not that, we shouldn't have greater levels of taxation, regulation, etc. It's that to get there, we need to be able to really build class power and to force politicians to listen to the people. I like to say that our job as socialists is to make politicians as scared of the people voting for them as the ones writing the checks. And, we're a bit of a long way off from that right now.
I mean, I get it. What do you think of the idea that as obviously neither of those approaches are mutually exclusive. And what do you think of the argument that a strong antitrust regime and the attendant regulatory state that gets more robust? Again, I think we're probably going to go away from that. Hopefully not, but we'll see. Because there's some who argue that, Joe Biden was actually is old enough to be pre-neoliberal when that turn happened. But what do you think of the argument that in inhibiting the wealth concentration and then the subsequent political power concentration of some of these major capitalists, you provide more room for workers to grow their power, right? Like, if Sheldon Adelson didn't have hundreds of, have billions of dollars, his ability to undermine unions would be less so. Same with Boeing, same with, and if there's multiple, you have a monopsony with a lot of these companies. And so their monopoly is not just in marketplace of what they sell, but their monopoly is also in when they hire. What do you think of that argument in terms of a sequencing, right? Where it's like, which is not to say you can't do both simultaneously and that you shouldn't, but
I think it makes sense. The question is, are politicians going to do these things? If they do, for whatever reason, decide to, as Biden did, implement, slightly more effective antitrust policy, then you can see on both a theoretical and a practical level how that would change things. Yes, it creates space for worker organizing. It potentially boosts worker power relative to capital. But if you think about that from the perspective of an organizer, of someone who's trying to get workers together within a Boeing or, even within a tech company, for example, where workers, again, have been trying to organize, they see this opening and the fact that this company is now being attacked on a different front. And they can say, right, we now have more power to be able to hold this company to account. The issue is whether or not that organizing actually happens. And that's why I think, certainly when I think about, the socialist argument on a lot of these things here in Europe, but I think it's true in the US as well, is that you can't just have a battle that's going on within political institutions, because it's going to be dominated by vested interests no matter what. There has to also be this battle that's taking place in workplaces and on the streets to hold those politicians to account.
Let's we don't have too much time, but let's talk about, as part of your book is dedicated to sort of expanding people's imagination as to what an alternative system could be, which is hugely important. I mean, we've heard this time and time again on this program. A plan beats no plan. And you're not going to have a plan unless you have a vision of these things. One of the things that I think, I'm old enough to have, to remember what Iceland did in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. Maybe we can talk about that. But also I want to touch on Lucas Aerospace, because I don't know that anybody knows about that in this country. But talk about Iceland, because this also goes to the idea of having a plan and being able to roll it out in those moments of crisis.
Yeah, so Iceland was really screwed over by the financial crisis. Basically, it had been this kind of small fishing economy that had created a niche for itself as a massive financial services producer, effectively, in the run-up to the financial crisis. So it had these huge banks that were kind of many times bigger than the actual economy. And then the meltdown happened and the banks went under. And as happened in many other places, the government was expected to be responsible, but couldn't ultimately bail out the banks. There was a referendum which made this different in Iceland as to basically what to do next, as to whether or not taxpayers would be on the hook for the liabilities of these banks. And there was this big referendum campaign, and a kind of new political party emerged through this, and the no campaign won. So basically the people of Iceland said, we're not going to just bail out the banks, and we're not just going to pay for this. We want a different kind of economic model. And a new political party was elected after this referendum on a platform of basically kind of promoting economic democracy. And there were some really interesting experiments that were going on locally and that took place in kind of the 2010s that were about putting this idea of economic democracy into practice. So in Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, there was this idea of the kind of Better Reykjavik program, where it was almost a form of participatory budgeting. Basically, citizens got to vote on how local government budgets would be used. And they ended up obviously voting for things that were relatively progressive, that were good for the climate, that were good for kind of homeless people, that gave them better public services. And it really kind of embedded this culture of making democracy real, basically at the local level. And you see this in the participatory budgeting movement all over the world, because it spreads everywhere. This is happening in South America, in Brazil. There's loads of local governments that give local people the opportunity to kind of vote on how their budget is spent. You see it in Spain, you see it in Canada, all these different places. Again, it's about making democracy real at the local level. And I included that in the book because I think it's a really good example of how community organizing, as well as labor organizing and kind of, protest, can have a really significant effect on, people's sense of what democracy means. And it cuts through this individualism thing that I was talking about earlier. This idea that we all have to compete against each other. As soon as you start showing people that when they collaborate and work together, things can change, suddenly their whole world opens up, and it becomes much easier to think about joining a union or joining a protest.
Now, Reykjavik, obviously much smaller than, scale than, frankly, either Great Britain or the U.S. But what was there an intellectual movement, a social movement that pre-existed, that was ready to sort of like fill the vacuum that came in the wake of this crisis?
Yeah, so this participatory budgeting movement actually emerged in Brazil in the 1980s in really quite big towns and cities across the country. And it was part of the kind of left-wing party coming to power at the local level. Their whole idea as a kind of socialist party that, you know, became less socialist as it got closer to power. But initially the whole idea was we want electoral power, but that's not going to be enough, because as soon as we get into the state, we're going to have capitalists coming for us everywhere. We're going to have to be fighting battles at every corner. So they thought that, well, they knew that they had to build a base, a foundation of popular power. And they were doing this anyway with the unions. But this whole idea of participatory budgeting was about how do we build a base of community power so that people are engaged in this project. They feel an immediate sense of ownership, and they start to kind of build movements at their local level that can kind of act as this foundation that can underpin the project as it gets attacked from all these different angles. And this is really important. You know, in the UK, for example, we had this movement to get Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party and then to become Prime Minister. And what was really interesting about that was because so many of the social movements and the unions that would have been involved in that project had been beaten back by over decades and decades and decades. That social base didn't exist. You know, the things I write about now are about why are more people not resisting capitalism? Why are more people not on strike? Why are more people not protesting? It's not because they don't care. It's not because they're not worried about the state of the planet. It's because they can't imagine what it would be like to protest, because this idea of individualism and competition is so deeply embedded. So these movements, like the participatory budgeting movement, like the labor movement, like all these social movements we have at the moment, it's not just about winning power and, like, you know, achieving particular campaign goals. It's about cutting through our sense that we are all alone.
Tell us about Lucas Aerospace.
This is my favorite example, actually, and I think it's one of the examples that illustrates this point about cooperation versus competitive individualism the most effectively. Because I gave you the example of Boeing already, which is this massive, you know, modern aerospace company. Lucas Aerospace existed in the 1970s in the UK. And it had been pretty successful, but there was growing competition from abroad, and it looked like the firm was going to go under. So the workers at Lucas Aerospace went to the government and said, we need you to nationalize us. And a government minister at the time, Tony Benn, said, well, we can't do that. So you guys need to come up with a plan as to how you're going to save this company. So the workers, the unionists who were involved in this, went to the workers and said, what can we do with this firm? How can we save it? And what they came up with, all of these workers together from all across this company, they all submitted ideas as to how they could transform Lucas Aerospace from a weapons manufacturer to a manufacturer of socially useful technologies. They also submitted ideas as to how it could be run democratically, how it could become a kind of worker-owned, democratically governed corporation that, again, produced things like wind turbines, healthcare tech, and used the resources that were in the firm now to produce weapons to make that transition. And this plan was published, and it was greeted with kind of astonishment and amazement across not just the left, but even the kind of mainstream. Like, you know, the Financial Times and MPs and people from kind of within the capitalist class looked at this and they said, wow, these workers that we thought were just stupid and just had to take orders, they really know a thing or two about how to govern themselves and how to kind of produce things. Now, ultimately, what happened was that this plan was developed in 1979. Thatcher was elected and she crushed this movement. You know, this whole thing about like free markets and giving people freedom. You're only allowed your freedom if you exercise it in the right ways. If it's a freedom to consume, basically, or a freedom to compete, not when it's a freedom to cooperate. And these workers basically were crushed and the plan didn't go anywhere. So what happened instead was that Lucas Aerospace was carved up in the shareholder value revolution of the 1980s. Bits of it were sold off. And what I found in the research for my book is that parts of what was once Lucas Aerospace had been bought by a company that made the inputs that were sold to Boeing that caused the plane to crash. I think this is such a powerful indicator of the two roots that we had as a society, that we still have as a society, which is basically corporate dominance or democratic governance of the economy. And one of them gives us planes that fall out of the sky. The other one gives us powerful, confident, self-organized workers producing socially useful technologies.
Grace Blakeley, writer at the Tribune. The book is Vulture Capitalism, Corporate Crimes, Backdoor Bailouts, and the Death of Freedom. Thanks so much. Really fascinating read, and a great primer on the dynamics really that have taken place over the past 50, 60 years in both our countries. Really appreciate you coming on.
It was great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break and head into the fun half of the program as we check out all the bat crap crazy things that Donald Trump has been up to for the past couple of days. We should also talk. I should have mentioned that in. I just want to reiterate: if you're in Pennsylvania, in particular, you can find places to get burner emails. You can even find apps that will let you have a burner app. This is, and you get $47 or $100, I think it is, in Pennsylvania if you sign up. It's a petition to support the First Amendment and Second Amendment as some type of like attempt to attract, I guess presumably only conservative voters. And God knows what Elon Musk is going to do with this data, but take the cash, or at very least, gum up the works. And we'll see if Elon Musk ends up having any type of legal accountability for what really appears to be an obviously illicit program of providing compensation to people based upon their registration status, which you're not supposed to be doing. But we will get into that. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. It is our members that keep this show ticking. Every now and then we have right-wingers who come after us, attempt to convince our sponsors not to sponsor the program. There's a show out there, I think, that their fans are doing the same thing to us right now based upon our reiterating of stories that are coming out of Gaza. There seems to be with the intensity of the Israeli assault on Gaza, the bombing that we've seen over the past couple of days, the use of starvation as a weapon in northern Gaza, the clear indications from the Israeli government and, frankly, large swaths of the Israeli society that are seeking to essentially reoccupy northern Gaza, and then, of course, to maintain the ghetto conditions of the rest of Gaza. There seems to be a growing intensity of pushback and defensiveness on the part of these people who have seemingly no issue with the just incredible onslaught of violence and death against civilians, children, women. And so the way they're dealing with it is attempting to contact our sponsors and get us desponsorfied. I don't know if that will be successful or not, but I do know that they can go F themselves because we have members who support us. And I am not hesitant to tell them, go F yourself. So join themajorityreport.com. It allows us the opportunity when I tell someone, not in my personal life, but in this context, to go F themselves, understand part of what allows me, or I should say all of what allows me to say that to them is your support. So thank you. And if you enjoy the show and you have the means to do it, I don't want anybody to have any financial stress whatsoever to support the show. Join themajorityreport.com.
Yep. Everybody who does is another person that Sam can be rude to on the other end.
Exactly. exactly. In fact, the ratio is much, it's probably much greater.
Yeah, one
for every member, there's
two people.
a half a dozen people I will tell to F off.
We need to do the numbers on that.
If you want access to the fun half of the program and you do not have the financial means, again, I don't want anybody to feel any financial stress. Send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Put help with membership and we will work something out with you. ESVN, what's happening? Are we going to get a Subway series or what?
You'd have to ask somebody who was paying attention. Emma is out sick today. So yeah, all this sports stuff. I'm waiting for basketball season, then I'll start paying attention. So, and we were supposed to talk about that, but Emma's sick because I take it the Giants lost yesterday. So I don't know, coincidence or not.
Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. I reviewed Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book, The Message, and also we got into
What'd you think?
I think it's the best one that I've read by him. I mean, all of his works I've found really, on an emotional level, I think he's, unparalleled in terms of modern writers. His politics, I think there's some critique of ideologically that to always be made, maybe even still here. But I think it's very interesting to hear him come to terms with, well, I was empowered by The Atlantic at a pretty key moment in my young writing career, but that power might not have been exactly what I needed in a moment because the certain types of editing, when you do the case for reparations, he reached for Israel as the example of that. And it's sort of him coming to terms with that in one of his most famous pieces. So very interesting to see a writer wrestle with that stuff. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
Oh, I didn't realize the Mets lost last night. I stopped paying attention when I thought they were up. Oh, sorry about that. Matt, I guess. Always remember you can subscribe on Twitch for free if you have Amazon Prime. Indeed. We love our Twitch folks. You are poggers, if that is the proper use of that word. Folks, see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy.
Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Denner.
Yeah, or a couple of them, just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
And back.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma is out today. Hank Aaron, 7:15 on the IM. No Subway series. Dragon Rider. Next time you talk to John Benjamin, tell him his whiskey is $14 a can. Sam Seder simp. Trump cosplaying as someone who thinks he doesn't deserve a living wage was the grossest thing I've done in a long time, seen in a long time. Indeed. In fact, let's play that. Here's Donald Trump loading fries at the fry station in Feasterville, Pennsylvania, McDonald's. I guess presumably it was to show that he's a working man, or that he wanted to be able to say that he worked at McDonald's, like
it's
Kamala Harris did. I'm not clear what this was about. I would have loved to seen him clean out the fryer, because the watching that drip on him and him screaming in pain would have been interesting. But here he is getting some fries at McDonald's.
We got the salt on it. Never touches the human hand.
Very good.
Nice and full.
Thank you.
Good. Tight.
Yep.
Beautiful.
And when he does interact with some people coming through the drive-thru who aren't exactly, I guess maybe Trump voters per se, he has an interesting way of deflecting.
Minimum wage should be raised.
Well, I think these people work hard. They're great. And I just saw a process that's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to see. These are great franchises and produce a lot of jobs, and it's great. And great people work in here too.
But
minimum wage is recently
really increased.
So yes, ma'am.
Minimum wage should be
Yeah, there you go. The classic. Wait, you haven't addressed the minimum wage. Yes, ma'am. Can I help you with something?
It's a beautiful process.
It's a beautiful process. And then he can't even figure out how to sound like he appreciates what the workers are doing. He immediately defers to these are great franchises. You know who doesn't own the franchises? The people working there.
Yeah. Because this is what's always been confused about this. He's doing it to make fun of Kamala. They're saying that it's because they don't think she actually worked there. But if they found out she did, they would still make fun of her because they think it's funny to work at McDonald's. That's the whole thing behind this whole stunt. It's funny that he's doing it.
Well, they went from, questioning whether AOC actually worked at that bar and whether her name was actually Sandy or something like that, to then mocking her for working at a bar.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
it's so revealing that it's like, well, okay, now do you have a appreciation of what these people do? Because I worked at the fry station in Bismarck, North Dakota. I would love to see Trump take an actual order. I mean, people pointed out the restaurant wasn't actually open, obviously, and it was like supporters that were ordering the stuff. But I would love to see Trump take a fry order where they say no salt and see how he contends with that little curveball. Like, no salt? What are you talking about? It's all covered in salt. But yeah, people should be insulted that he did that, but I don't know if that gets translated.
No. No, that will not get translated, but people should be insulted. Let's turn to Elon Musk. Oh, I have said many, many times, for many, many reasons, that billionaires should be illegal, not the people. The ability to accrue that amount of money should be illegal. It should be impossible to do and not have a run afoul of the law. We should have taxation. We should have regulatory schemes that make it impossible to accrue this much money. Elon Musk bought Twitter several years ago. He then continued on to run it in such a way that it lost at least 80% of its value. And it was irrelevant to him. Sort of puts to lie the idea of like, why would any capitalist ever run a business in a way that wasn't making money? It's irrational. Well, it turns out when you're a billionaire, that's why you have billions. It's so that your irrationality or your whimsy can be addressed without really any implications to your material condition. And Elon Musk bought Twitter and then has poured money into the Trump campaign. I think more than we fully can anticipate or assess at this point. He's got multiple organizations that are functioning in support of Trump's campaign. Let's just start with the sort of low-hanging and most forward-facing stuff. That is that Elon Musk's is financing a super PAC that is been tasked with, at the very least, Arizona, Nevada, and Wisconsin. I would imagine, and obviously Pennsylvania. I would also imagine in Michigan, in the get out the vote efforts for the Republicans. In Wisconsin, Charlie Kirk's organization, Turning Points, must have been performing so poorly that Elon Musk's organization was coming to Bigfoot him. And I say it must be so poorly because there is multiple stories out now. And look, take this with a grain of salt because it's really, really hard to assess how this will impact the election. But if the polls show that Trump and Harris are tied, then getting out the vote becomes even that much more important. News story, I think it came out of The Guardian.